now part of the All Everything Entertainment Podcasting Network.
Working Fans Podcast. Cool.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Coming down 3, 2.
Welcome back for another week of the Working Fans Podcast. This is AJ. I'm the former wrestler. We've got Dave, the ultimate fan, here with us. As we do every week, our producer Joe likes to make us sound good and makes us look way more professional than we actually are. As always, you can find us on Twitter, that's @FansWorking, Facebook, Working Fans Pod. We've got email where you can reach out to us and please contact us to let us know what you think of the podcast and for any ideas that you might have. That's workingfanswrestlingpod@gmail.com. We're on Instagram where you can keep up with us at workingfanswrestling_pod. And then you can now listen to us on all major platforms, including Anchor.fm. We're on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Apple Podcasts, and you can actually check us out on YouTube. Now, it's important when you go onto the Apple Podcasts and YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a rating, let us know what you think so you can help us out and we can continue to do what we love and bring you guys in as fans.
Guys, I want to take a second to tell you about All Everything Entertainment. They are your home for the latest breaking news and opinions about sports, wrestling, and entertainment. From jock to geek and everyone in between, they will definitely have something for you. As I'm recording this, they have 10 live weekly podcasts that can be watched daily on Facebook, YouTube, or alleverythingentertainment.com. The replays are available on their Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, or iTunes channels. Their shows run the gamut as they talk about the NFL, NBA, NHL, football, movies, bi-weekly top 10 countdowns, paranormal activity, wrestling, WWE, AEW, NJPW, UFC, Bellator, and so much more. These guys, they're just like you. They're passionate individuals who love a variety of subjects, and that's why they started this company in May of 2019 to kind of be a one-stop shop for entertainment. On September 11th, 2020, they made arguably their biggest signing by agreeing to terms with yours truly, the Working Fans Podcast. I was out of work sick, and I was happy to join them as a part of their team. You can find them on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube by searching All Everything Entertainment, or go to alleverythingentertainment.com for their full schedule and a full list of their shows. If you like us, you will 100% like them. Thank you. We want to take a minute to thank our newest sponsor on the show, 482 Designs. That is FOUR, the numbers 82 Designs, 482 Designs. You can find them on Facebook by looking up FOUR 82 Designs, at FOUR 82 Designs on Instagram. And if you want to email them, go to FOUR82designs@gmail.com. Pretty soon, we're going to be rolling out some high-quality t-shirts and stickers that were just done by the sponsor. Please check them out for any of your screen printing needs.
First off, it's light years better than our first run. Also, like, divide the washer and dryer. They look good, and they're good quality.
Nice. And those stickers before Paco chewed them up were amazing. And luckily, we'll be getting some more in, hopefully, before we start selling them to fans. But that's FOUR 82 Designs.
Night full of diamonds, dipping fingers into sea of stars, arms outstretched, radiating visage of desire, spiral galaxies in your eyes, and me, here, fire-kissed and drowning in a shadow of trees.
All right, everybody, it's the Working Fans Podcast with the man they call Dave, and I'm here with AJ Strangebrew, and today we got another Dave versus AJ segment where we're talking who was the better horseman. Is it, not Ric Flair, there'd be no argument, Tully Blanchard, or is it that big, bad, tall, lanky son of a bitch from Sweetwater, Texas. The man with the float over superplex, Barry Windham.
For a minute there, I thought you were going Bob Orton. I don't remember Bob Orton being a member of the Horsemen.
He wasn't, but Barry had that. Actually, both guys had two of the better suplexes we don't see anymore. Tully with the slingshot suplex and Barry with the float over superplex. Nobody floated over like Barry Windham, and he would do it in a regular superplex too. AJ, I gave you, of course, the gentleman debate. You chose Barry. State your case. Why is Barry the better horseman than Tully? I know you love both these guys.
This one's actually one of our harder debates because we're actually comparing two of the best at what they did compared to when we normally are basically contemplating who was the worst piece of shit. So it's kind of an interesting debate.
By the way, folks, AJ's going on about 3 hours sleep today, so he's a little crankier than normal, but that's all right.
I think that'll add to the discussion.
Sure.
I think Barry Windham's at his best here. I think that this is the best version of Barry Windham. I think babyface Barry Windham, even though he had all the talent and all the wrestling in the world, ability-wise, was unfortunately not always enjoyable and exciting to watch. I don't know about you, but when Barry Windham turned on Dusty Rhodes and became a horseman, it added an edge to him that he really needed. I can only watch so much of the U.S. connection with him and freaking Mike Rotunda, or Mike Rotunda if you prefer.
I do.
Named during that time period. To me, watching Barry Windham, the babyface, was just very bland. When he switched over and had J.J. Dillon with him, all of a sudden he's wearing the black glove, he's cheating, he's doing underhanded things, and he still wasn't saying a lot. He just was all of a sudden doing actions that you wouldn't expect from him, and he did it with such an edge that I think this is the best Barry Windham. And I think that, quite frankly, the Horseman at this time, even without Ole, I think is the best Horseman. So, to me, it's hard. You do value Tully, but Tully was always the next level down from Ric Flair. He was the heel that was just so close to being over the top, but just couldn't quite get there. And I think that he didn't take his role in the Horsemen quite as well as Barry. I think Barry accepted that he wasn't going to be the main man, but accepted what he needed to do. So I think he was just a better Horseman.
I like that qualifies you as a better Horseman. You knew to sit back and recognize that Ric Flair was going to be the man, which is why Sting wasn't a very good Horseman.
Yes, exactly.
Which is why Iron Anderson, besides Ric Flair, is the greatest Horseman of all time, because he knew.
You're damn right.
I want to take exception to one of the things you said. As far as Rotunda, I like to call him by his given name, Erlin. That's just me. All right. The other thing I would say it's interesting about these arguments here is that one of the votes I got for Barry was actually for that reason you talked about, that his turn on Dusty was so impactful in his entrance to the Horsemen. Now, the flip side of this, too, is some of the votes for Tully was because I think he was even, and here's the funny thing about that, right? Almost everybody that said the votes for Tully were actually all would say, in fact, unanimously all would say, except for one, I'll get to that later, all would say Barry was a better overall performer. Oh, I'm a big Barry fan. But they just said Tully was more the Horseman, they thought. And I think because you look at it, you compare the top two Horsemen, and I think this is universal. It's the original Horseman, and then it's the Horseman with Barry, right? So, because like Luger, I think, got into Horseman right before Barry, and I think he was out, and then Barry turned on Luger, right? Yeah, because Luger became the babyface, and Barry turned on Luger too.
Tag match.
Right. And so
tag match against the Horseman when Barry acted like Luger slighted him.
Yes.
And left him for dead.
And nobody ever says, my point to that was that the sequel to the Horseman was the best one. It's that third incarnation of the Horseman that everybody likes. And certainly not the ones years after. It's Barry or the original one. So that's a great point. Barry is a huge difference maker.
Well, for whatever reason, I don't even think people think of Luger as a Horseman. Even though he was in the second incarnation.
He was.
I don't think what people think of Luger as a horseman. I think for whatever reason they glaze straight over that. It's like Sid. People don't think of Sid as a horseman, even though he was in the fourth version of him.
Yeah.
And I think that the two of them are more thought of for their singles careers, whereas Barry Windham, for whatever reason, even though he held multiple major championships, he is thought of as a horseman, and Tully Blanchard is thought of as a horseman.
You know what's funny, too? That's one thing, though. You're right. And that's kind of a thing, maybe because we're both Barry Windham fans. I see that. Right, yeah, Barry is thought more of a horseman. But it's also kind of a slight. People don't tend to give the credit to Barry that he deserves. Not for his ability, but for the fact that even though Barry didn't win that great big world title run like we would have liked, a lot of people don't even recognize how successful he truly was. Like, he was right there. Multiple U.S. title reigns. He did have a version of the NWA world title. Like, Barry was, just there, but it's not really talked about too much.
Well, the other major difference between, and I know we're not debating Luger and Barry, we're debating Tully and Barry.
Yeah.
But the other major difference between when Barry became a horseman and when Luger became a horseman is people didn't know who the hell Luger was when he had come up from Florida. He was a big muscle guy, and yeah, that was impressive, but people really didn't know who he was.
Right.
Whereas when Barry did that turn, it was very impactful.
Sure.
People knew who he was from the WWF. People knew who he was from his time in the NWA. He was a major babyface. Next to Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, he might have been the top babyface next to those two guys. So it was incredibly impactful when he became a horseman. Whereas Tully Blanchard was there in the indoctrination of the horseman and was already a heel. So once again, it wasn't necessarily impactful when Tully became a horseman. It was just, okay, yeah, he's one of those guys.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, like you said, Barry had a lot of recognition. He even teamed in the first WrestleMania with IRS. So, I mean, obviously a huge deal there. I know some of you have been, but you love the fact that I'm referring to Mike Rotundo as IRS. Any true fan of Mike Rotundo, sidebar here, likes to think of him as Erwin R. Shyster.
I like to think of him as the father of Bray Wyatt.
Yes, he's that too. Actually, sidebar on Rotundo again real quick. Your favorite incarnation of Rotundo?
Florida Championship Wrestling, Mike Rotundo.
Okay, I thought you might have said the Varsity Squad. You were actually low-key big fan.
I do like the Varsity Squad.
Yeah.
I think that it is good. But once again, that's not really, it was focusing on the group.
Sure.
I know that he was the focal point as far as the in-ring performing, but to me the focus of that was actually Kevin Sullivan.
So, getting back to the subject at hand here, Barry versus Tully. Okay, so now you didn't know what we're talking about as usual today, and I gave you the opportunity, and I had already saw the votes for this. I only polled about it. I never poll a lot of people, just try to get a nice uneven number so we have a winner, because we fucked that up one time. And I got about 5 people that voted on this, all right? Now, when I came up with this idea, I, like you, love both of these guys, but gun to my head, I'm truly more of a Barry Windham fan, which is more like you.
I actually think Tully's one of the best heels ever to be in the business because he's a natural heel.
Yeah.
I think that he just draws attention to himself, and he does have that cocky swagger. For someone who's only about 5'10", he had good power in the ring, great technical wrestler, and coming from a wrestling family, absolutely phenomenal at ring psychology. So,
underrated on the power. Because, I mean, to do that slingshot suplex he used to do on some of the people he would do, he had to have some strength to pull off some of that.
One of the reasons why you don't see the slingshot suplex anymore is because of the amount of power that it takes to be able to get somebody going in that other direction. Hit them, you got to hit them on the quads. If you don't hit the legs on the quads, it's going to be incredibly hard to get them back over and into the suplex position. You see Cesaro do a version of it when he's lifting people from outside the ring and how hard that is. And that's not a slingshot, that's just a deadlift, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it's almost a similar amount of power that Tully had to use to get people going in one direction and then back in the other direction.
I think one of the reasons
a lot smaller than Cesaro.
I think one of the reasons why people don't like to use it probably is it's also not the smoothest looking move. But that's one of the reasons why I like it. Like, it looks...
one of the reasons it's not utilized because people don't like getting dropped on their groin on the freaking top rope and then moonshotted into a suplex.
Yeah, Tully probably give those enhancement guys a lot of choice on what they were going to do.
Yeah. When he's saying, hey, you wore your cup, right?
So, I'm going to make an MMA comparison. MMA comparison here sometimes, or even boxing, really close fights will be a split decision. But every once in a while, there's a close fight. It's not really a split decision. All the judges unanimously agreed on this one guy won the fight, but it's just because the judges got it right and they realized every round was close. That's kind of what this was. It was 4-1, but everybody that voted for one guy basically said the other guy was like right there. It was hard to make this decision. That guy who was the better horseman was Tully Blanchard by this vote.
I'm not surprised by that. That's one of the reasons I picked Barry.
Well, here's on. I'm going to make it. You're the second vote. I'm going to make it a third vote. I'm voting for Barry too, because I actually like Barry. So fuck the world. However, we will go with the honor. It is 4-3. We'll give it to Tully, but I just wanted the record to be known.
Well, you can give it to Tully. I'm still going to give it to Barry.
I thought, okay, the people gave it to Tully.
As we know, while we take the people's vote into consideration, at the end of the day, fuck the people.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're right. I'm more of a Barry fan. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Randy. Randy was the one guy who didn't even, add anything to it. He just said definitely Tully. But
let's be clear about this. Randy, when it comes to having taste and who are his favorites, is a true genius in picking people to support.
He likes you.
Randy Osgood, your opinion to me is absolutely gold. However, in this instance, it's Barry Windham.
Barry Windham, yeah. Randy also has a huge biasness towards the Blanchard family, so I'm not surprised there, too. All right. Well, that's going to be it. The people gave it to Tully. We did not. We're giving it to Barry. And that's it for Dave versus AJ. We're the Working Fans Podcast. We're out.
Hey guys, this is Alex Thorn, former professional wrestler, and I am the host of the Over AF Wrestling Podcast with Dangerous Danny. Right now, you're listening to the Working Fans Podcast, and you better take a look at all the old episodes because they're really, really good. Hit that subscribe button before I body slam you.
All right, everybody, it's the Working Fans Podcast with the man they call Dave. And today I got myself a musician, an author, an entrepreneur, and more importantly, he's the host of the Over AF Wrestling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alex Thorn.
Man, going back to my old Lone Wolf wrestling days. Thank you for bringing me onto the show, man. I appreciate it.
No, awesome, man. You know what? What made you decide to do a podcast? Let's just start there.
Oh my God, you know what? To be honest with you, it wasn't my choice to do a wrestling podcast. I walked away from the wrestling business in 2012, but I've got a buddy, Casey Omega, who, to this day, he's a huge wrestling fan and he wants to be an executive producer for WWE. And so, with your friends, you just always talk about the old school stuff, You talk about Shawn Michaels super kicking Hulk Hogan, and you talk about the NWO, and you talk about Earthquake crushing Hogan, and all these different things. And he just said, hey, man, why don't we get on a podcast? Let's do like a smaller version of what Conrad is doing, a longtime fan and a pro wrestler. And I said, okay, if we can get a catchy name and a good logo together and a decent format, then we'll go ahead and do it. And so, we went forward, and eventually it just became me and Danny, who is my co-host now. That's kind of where it started. And I said, let's see how long we can make this last.
It's funny, I just had this talk. We're starting to do a live show now, too, and we have some guests that are like this podcast network on, and I'm finding that more and more people are doing like retro podcasts, and it basically what's old is new again. Like everybody seems to love to talk about the old stuff more.
Yeah, because there's so many podcasts talking about, what's going on today. And, even though wrestling may not be as big as it once was, it still has a ton of fans.
Right.
So, and they're watching, every Monday, Wednesday, and whatever day SmackDown is on. I don't even know. They're still watching. So there's a lot of podcasts that are catching up on today's stuff. But with the WWE Network and Impact Plus, TNA has their own app like that too. It's a great time to kind of look back and make use of all that.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up that Impact app too. I just got that recently, and I'm searching through it, and I didn't realize they have like St. Louis wrestling on there. Like there's like so much old stuff they had from other promotions. I wasn't even aware this was on there. So it's like, again, they're maximizing that content too. Like video libraries in the past seem to like to really be the big thing.
Yeah, what's old is always new again. Always.
Now, you're also a musician?
Yeah, man. I've been playing since I was 14, so it's been about 18, 19 years.
Wow. That's kind of funny. Like, so you've always had you kind of always liked being a performer then?
Always. Like, the first thing, as embarrassing as it may sound, man, my first dream was to be a tap dancer in 1990. Little did I know tap dancing was way... it wasn't popular anymore, but,
right.
You know, my uncle was showing us, you know, these old 50s movies and stuff where they were still doing that. And I was like, I want that reaction. Whatever I'm hearing on the other side of that performer, I want that. So it was always to be in front of people, some way, somehow.
You know, that makes so much sense, though. I can totally relate to that because, all right, so you're young, your uncle's showing you this, and it just looks like the coolest thing. You have no reference at that age, so you don't know that it's like, you know, something that's a little passé for a lot of people. You're just like, I love it. This is it.
Yep, exactly. And he was an old school head for whatever reason, even though he was, at that time, even though he was like, you know, in his 20s, he wasn't showing me what was popular at that time, Madonna and Michael Jackson and Prince. He wasn't showing that stuff. He was showing stuff from the 50s, so I'm assuming it may have been stuff that, you know, maybe his parents showed him that it stuck with him.
Yeah, that's cool, though, that you got, I like that, though. I mean, to me, it's like, I don't know, maybe much like pro wrestling, much like anything. I like when their stories are a little different. You know what I mean? Like, it's so, everything like you talk to is usually just the same. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be this. So you're like, I want to be a tap dancer. Like, okay, let's do it. You know? Fuck yeah. That's what I want to tell you.
I was like, yeah, man, I guess so. And I looked, you know, when I wrote my book in 2017, that was the first time I thought back. Mm-hmm. And I said, wait, what did I want to do when I was a kid? Because it wasn't wrestling and it wasn't, you know, rock and roll. And then I started thinking and, you know, traveling down those roads, and I was like, oh my God. That's right. I wanted to be a tap dancer. I forgot all about that. I was tap dancing at my little friends', you know, birthday parties and stuff that they would invite me to. I'm sure annoying the hell out of my mom back then, but yeah, it was what it was.
So you had a book out too. Tell us about that. What's it called and a little bit about it.
Yeah. So the book is called I Am Thorn, How I Broke the Chains of Mediocrity and Learned How to Live to Win. I started to write it because I had noticed that, wow, I'm only like 27 years old at that time. 27 years old, and I'm like, I not only filmed for some of the biggest stars that came through Chicago with my company, Jet Dragon Productions, I was already in Texas and Arizona and New York and LA playing in rock bands when I was 15, 16, 17. But then I became a wrestler for 4 years. And then after that, I had a successful personal training business where I had 3 buildings here in Chicago. And I'm like, I'm only 27. Like, this is something to write about.
Right.
And I just started kind of traveling down those roads of remembering things and putting it into a book form. And it took about a year and a half to get it all together, a little under $1,000. And I launched it on Amazon and on my IamThorn.com website. And it sold really well, man. I was surprised at how many people, you know, were willing to take photos with it and bought the physical copies. It's just crazy that at 27, 28, I think I released it, I was able to tell people my life story and say, it's not even done yet. I haven't even gotten started.
Would you say that you've always had a knack for promotion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I appreciate it because I'm like listening to this and I'm like thinking like, okay, you're way ahead of where I was at that point, right? You know, like understanding the game, you know, it's, I was talking to, I think it was Ken Anderson we had on the show, and we were talking about how basically that, you know, it's important to grind, hustle, and you always hear people say that. But also I feel like timing is so important in life too. Like you can go for something, but it can be the complete wrong time, or you can go for something the right time. And I guess what I was going to ask you too is how important has timing been in your life?
Really important, man. You got to strike when the iron's hot. Like right now, let's put it this way. We're in a pandemic that, you know, nobody saw coming at this time last year. Maybe some of the scientists did and so forth, but nobody walking the streets saw this coming. And right now, and again, even though I'm not trying to self-promote, but we're talking about me here, I have my own supplement company coming out called T-Cell Nutrition.
Yep.
And I initially was thinking like, oh, it'll be a good time to launch. But then the pandemic happened. I was like, wait, this is the perfect time to launch.
Right.
Like, because people are afraid to go to the gym. People don't want to catch, what's going on outside and be in big groups. But if they can do anything, it's at least supplement their nutrition. And yeah, they could try to eat better, but at least if they got some supplements to try to get them going, that'll be great. So I think, striking while the iron's hot is really important. I mean, no different with the rock and wrestling era. Hogan and Vince McMahon struck at the right time. Austin and Vince struck at the right time. The NWO, that was another thing that just struck at the right time. And I think timing is everything. You got to look at everything around you and say, you know what? Yeah, we got to jump into this right now.
We're jumping all over the place, and I love it. Actually, I like interviews like this. I want to ask you now because I think we basically are around the same age, and you were there for both boom periods. Like, we're talking about the NWO Attitude Era, but I was my first memory of wrestling, like, where I got hooked on it. Like, it was Jimmy Snuka getting the coconut cracked over his head by Rowdy Piper. What got you into wrestling? Like, what really hooked you?
Brother, the first memory is Hogan and Big Boss Man inside of the big blue steel cage on Saturday night's main event. I mean, I know my first memory, like the very first memory I have is walking down the street holding my mom's hand. And in the other hand, I had a Hogan figure and I think a Ted DiBiase figure. Oh. But the moment, like that wrestling moment that sticks out in my head that's like, oh my God, this was it, was Hogan and Big Boss Man in the big blue steel cage. And I didn't even put everything together that was right at the launch of No Holds Barred, Hogan's movie, because that's when Zeus debuted on that episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. No wonder I have such an affinity for that movie and the colors and everything, because it was my first real big memory.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting, too, like, those two in particular, I feel like had an underrated chemistry. Like, I've just heard a lot of people who remember that. Like, I look back at Big Boss Man, and he was such a character. Like, he fit in with that time period. But, boy, like, what a tremendous worker for that size, the bumps and everything he would do, too. Like, what a perfect foil for Hogan at that time.
He was really unique because he didn't bump. I mean, even to this day, I've never seen anybody bump like him. There's a couple unique bumpers. It's like him. Randy Savage has a certain way of bumping that nobody else did. Sting. Yeah. If you ever look at it, he has a really odd way of selling. Yeah. And nobody's ever sold like him or bumped like him. So, yeah, Bossman is one of those unique guys that, for his side, that baseball slide. Yes. That he would do to the outside constantly. It was so cool.
I also enjoyed the Sergeant Slaughter would take this bump over the turnbuckle, and like for a big guy, he would go completely flying and outside the ring sometimes. And I'm like, what the hell? You can do that?
Yeah, well, but you know what the thing about Sarge was? He looked a little like Goofy though. Goofy.
Right. He did, and that's why I totally catch you off guard when he could do something like that. I was like, what the?
Right.
T-Cell Nutrition. We talked about musician. You're an author. Obviously, you're a great entrepreneur, as we've learned. What would you maybe give some advice for people who like are trying to grind out there, whether it's a podcast or your business? Like, some technical advice on just hanging in there, or how to promote yourself.
Promote. That would be the biggest. Even if your idea is like half baked, I'd say promote the hell out of it, because that's the one thing people forget to do. They put so much work, let's say, into podcasts. They'll put a lot of work into the quality of the podcast and research, but they don't know how to get it out to people to hear it and listen to it. No matter what you're doing, man, promote, especially now with like social media. We've got the greatest chance to grab the exact people we want for whatever our business is. You can literally say, if you come down, you take maybe 30 minutes to an hour and take a blank sheet of paper and say, who do I want as my customer? You can actually say, this is the age range, this is what they make, this is where they live, this is what they like, and you can plug that into Facebook and Twitter. You can actually get the exact person you want for your podcast, and it's never been easier than it is now.
Yeah. And what's interesting, too, is, there's never been a time to, like, just free promote, right? Like, that's what basically all social media is. It's free promotion for you right now. Mm-hmm. I was saying this to somebody, though, but what is interesting is, and I'm wondering, too, with COVID now, too, and everybody, like you're talking about, too, like, nobody wants to leave the house sometimes. Like, a lost skill I see happening is the face-to-face verbal and even the phone call itself. Like, we're kind of going somewhere where I've noticed where some people are afraid. I saw this great meme the other day where it was like this guy looking down on us from heaven, and the caption was like, "My ancestors looking at me knowing they had to fight for food, and I'm having a panic attack ordering a pizza." And I thought, man, that is so true right now, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And I just so I guess what I'm saying too is, in a roundabout way, is promote, but also if you have the skill right now that you can communicate and you're not afraid to go up to somebody to talk to them face to face or get on the phone, you should probably look into doing a business or something, because you're already ahead of a lot of people and have a skill that a lot of people don't right now.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're 100% right with that. Earlier you mentioned Ken Anderson.
Yes.
He's an interesting guy. I actually went to TNA because I trained with his trainer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had went to, it was like a December pay-per-view that TNA had. He was supposed to be facing Jeff Hardy. And we got the hard camera seats. So right where the hard camera is, where it used to be, I don't know what they do now in Impact, but in 2009, 2010, where the hard camera is, that's where they seat friends and family. And we were supposed to go there because we got invited by Ken Anderson, me and his trainer. And what's funny was I think that was that time when Jeff Hardy had like completely busted Ken's back of his head open or something like that with a weird chair shot. And he couldn't make it, so he got replaced by Matt Morgan. But that would have been my time to really get in and, start talking to Ken. But unfortunately, I didn't get to expand my relationship with him, just basically his trainer. But I did get backstage at TNA and met the rest of the guys back there. So that was cool.
Yeah. It's funny. I guess my story with him too is I'm meaning to have him back on, but as you know, you just keep grinding and you meet a lot of different people. But the day I interviewed him, and I've never asked about this, I know why he wouldn't tell me. It makes perfect sense, but the timing of it was so funny. I recorded the interview on a Thursday. He was working for NWA Power. He was supposed to be on a pay-per-view Friday. And then he wasn't there because he was injured, but nobody knew about it. Obviously, he wouldn't tell me either. So I'm tuning the pay-per-view, and I'm telling my friends, I just interviewed this guy yesterday, man. What a great interview. He's going to be on the show. And I'm like, oh, wait, where the fuck's Ken? And then I found out afterwards the story from, because I never wanted to be, you interview someone, but I don't know him. So I'm like, that's not my place to ask. So then I found out afterwards, he had an injury. The timing was kind of close. And I was like, okay. I was like, but it was just the timing of it. I'm like, man, of all the times to interview him,
That's hilarious.
The Over AF Wrestling Podcast. There's a format you were telling me about too. Like, you guys do this in season, which I think is pretty cool, because I always think leave them wanting more myself. Promote it as best you can. Why should people watch this? What's different about it? Listen, watch. What a dumbass. But you know what I mean.
I get you, brother. Yeah, no, you know what? It's really cool because, again, me and Danny, we come from that same era, which is around that 80s, that golden era. And the thing is that he continued to be a pro wrestling fan while I got into pro wrestling in 2008. So he has that perspective of looking at it from the outside, and I have that perspective of looking at it from the inside. And honestly, when we go back and look at these podcasts, when we go back and look at these pay-per-views, because it is a retro podcast, I see them differently now, right? I can't watch I can't watch the Attitude Era and mark out like I used to, because I know so much more now than I did then. And so I look at like the quality of work rate versus him. He looks at it with nostalgia.
Right.
But, we also realize that there are people that watch wrestling today. There are going to be people who want to know what's going on today or talk about today. So not only do we talk about an old school pay-per-view, but we have a segment called What's Over Now, where Danny goes over what's been happening in pro wrestling the last week for about 5 to 10 minutes. And we also have a segment called the Over AF Wrestling Game of the Week, where we take a few minutes out to talk about one of the old school wrestling games like No Mercy or WWF The Arcade Game or WCW versus the World. And it's just really cool because we kind of cover all of that fandom that we have, and you hear us having fun, man. And that's the thing. So many of us get together and we talk about old school things or things we remember. And this is just like talking to your friends. So it's a fun podcast to be a part of, and that's the Over AF Wrestling Podcast. And
like I said, I really like the fact you're doing it in seasons. I was just telling somebody, to me, that's one of the things we could use a little more of. Everything's so binged, so if you can make people wait for it and want it, I was like, that's a good thing,
Yeah, well, in between seasons, too, like, for one, you don't want to have burnout, because with running a podcast, you're pretty much doing everything. You're not only distributing, you're doing the album art, you're contacting people for it, you're doing research. It can get daunting, so it's to avoid burnout, but it's also to give people a chance to catch up on all the older episodes. It's a good time to promote all the older stuff and kind of get together and plan between me and Danny about what we want to do in the next season and if there's anything new we want to introduce.
Is there anything else you want to promote, sir? Anything else you want to talk about? Floor's yours.
Oh my God, man. You know what? The one thing I do want to talk about that I touched on earlier was my new nutrition brand, T-Cell Nutrition. And again, it's something that I had a passion for about 5 years ago when I was just getting done with my personal training business, just wrapping it up there. But something I've always been passionate about, even when I was wrestling and when I was personal training, was making sure that I was supplementing well, because the foods that we eat, you know how much fake stuff is in those foods, man.
Yeah.
We're barely eating things that should be in our bodies now. And it's really important to me, especially with COVID, to keep, vitamin C, vitamin D, and multivitamins. For some people, that stuff is boring, but man, right now it's so necessary. So if you're interested in keeping your immune system up, then take a look at T-Cell Nutrition. We've got our first multivitamin coming out called Cyber V, and that's going to be out on the market and out for pre-sale in about 2 weeks.
Awesome, man. That's good to hear. You're right. It is the right time to do that. Actually, myself, I've definitely loaded up on the vitamins in this time, and I think the same thing. Like people will tell you, oh, well, if you get sick, go here. To me, it's like, okay, what about taking care of yourself so you just don't get sick? Do the best you can.
Yeah.
Right? To me, it's like, that's right there. Dude. Come on,
You can try.
Right. Yeah, take an effort. Don't, Go back to that meme, the panic attack over ordering a pizza. But
yeah, dude.
All right, man. Any social media you want to plug too?
Yeah, for sure. If you're on Twitter, follow us at OverAFPod. That's our handle there. And, of course, it's overafpod.com, so you can catch up on everything that we've done. If you actually head over to my website, IamThorn.com, there's a shop on there where we have OverAF merchandise. And if you have a business that's looking to get promoted, especially in these times, write us at overafpod@yahoo.com, because we can get together with you, put together a 30-second to a 60-second commercial, and get your business heard. Because right now we have 18,000 downloads. We've got over 100 5-star reviews on iTunes, and we're just rocking and rolling in places like Canada. We've got so many downloads in the United States, Mexico, Brazil, Bangladesh, China. It's just crazy when you look at the map and see where the downloads are coming from. So if you've got a business and you want to get exposure, write to us at overafpod@yahoo.com. We'll help you out.
Awesome. I might message you myself after, so.
Absolutely, bro. No problem.
Awesome, man. All right. I appreciate when someone puts a little something on it, man. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Welcome to the 531, where we debate a top 5 list on a particular subject, further discuss it down to a top 3, and then eventually settle on a top 1. Now, after this beat, we'll get to today's subject.
Subject, vote down to a top 3, and then further debate it down to a top 1. This week, I am deep in the trees in Maine. I am calling in because I am that dedicated on my vacation to join Dave, to join AJ Strangebrew for our top 5 NWA wrestlers. Guys, how you holding up on this election day today?
Oh, I just waited in line for 2 hours because I didn't get my absentee ballot. So, yeah, waiting 2 hours to vote's a tremendous thing.
That's a dedicated man right there. All right. But I'll tell you what we're going to vote on instead. Right now, we're about to vote on the top 5 matches of the National Wrestling Alliance. And that's what I want to talk about.
I thought you wanted to talk about that Joe only goes to Maine because he found out the state bird is a puffin.
He definitely is this week, but I'm going to bring you a fan from a neighboring state. We got Jesse from New Hampshire, and he's got the Flair versus Steamboat from the Chi-Town Rumble. He's got the Tully versus Magnum, I Quit. He's got the Midnights versus the Road Warriors scaffold match. He's got Dusty versus Flair, the Bash Cage match. And he's got Cody versus Aldis, the first title match. AJ, are you still alive? What do you think about that list?
Wow, I cannot believe he put Cody and Nick Aldis on there. I applaud him going with current NWA and it not being Zicky Dice. That's fine. To me, the scaffold match doesn't belong there. He's got a right to his opinion, as everybody does, but sometimes your opinions are just wrong.
It's funny. Me and Joe talked a little bit off air. We had to record this one again. We had some issues, and I actually agree with you a little bit on that. The scaffold match is quite the spectacle, but in its premise, it is very hard to wrestle when you're hanging on a scaffold for your life, trying not to break your actual neck.
No, great. Yeah, like you said, great spectacle. But when it comes to actually being a wrestling match, straight garbage.
Yeah, I feel like the appeal of it is really Cornette falling from the scaffold and knowing that he busted out his knees because he fell too fast for Bubba and catch him like he was supposed to.
Well, I think that's enjoyable for anybody who's ever talked to Jim Cornette.
Goddamn!
Motherfucker. All right, I got my boy Jake St. John here. He's got a list.
For the show tomorrow night. By the time you'll listen to this, he would have been on last night's episode.
Fun fact for you guys.
Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Check us out.
Check us out. That's all right. We need views. Check us out. We got Jake's list out of here. He's got the Steiners versus Hirose Hase and Masahiro Chono. He's got Funk versus Flair in an I Quit match. Now, some of these guys did put WCW stuff in here, but that's fine. I'm going to include it. We got Eddie Guerrero versus Benoit in their debut on Nitro for both men. Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio, Halloween Havoc 97. And Brian Pillman versus Jushin Liger, Super Brawl 92.
Wow.
Now, Dave, you have a definite distinction between NWA and WCW.
Yes.
That you were not a fan of WCW matches hitting this list. What is the big, kind of dividing line to you between the two companies?
I think eventually they're separate promotions. I think the lines got blurred. As a kid, I could tell you I didn't know NWA was bought out by WCW at one point because they had kind of blurred the lines. And in retrospect, I like to kind of go back and I like to kind of divide them up that way. That's all. It's just a thing, me personally know that they were two different promotions, even if the lineage was the same for a while.
Yeah, it didn't help that the WCW had that NWA belt for a little bit and had that kind of confusing crossover.
It did.
Personally, I say it's important to be understanding of our fans. And you know what? If they don't understand the timeline, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Very understanding of you, sir.
Jake St. John can write a poem, but he can't write a list. Now, next on the list, I'm going to give you me, because I'm only one of 3 lists I got. Dave, sit down for a second, because I got Flair versus Ray, Starrcade 83.
Ain't worth for shit.
I got Tully versus Magnum, the I Quit match.
That's a winner.
I've got the Midnights versus the Rock and Roll, and any match they were in. I've got Cody versus Aldis, the 2 out of 3 falls match. And I've got Flair versus Vader from Clash of the Champions. I believe it's Flair versus Vader because it's the one where they start at Flair's house and they're sitting there talking with him and then they get him into the limo and get him to the arena.
You're close. It is Vader Flair, but it's Starrcade 93.
Shit, either way.
Yeah.
Still a good one.
It is a good one. One of my favorites. That was actually the genesis of me and AJ's friendship. So.
Yeah, you can blame Vader and Flair.
Yeah.
I included it because for me, it's one of the more memorable, and now that you divide it up, it's one of the more memorable WCW moments. But I mean, growing up for me, WCW was kind of always NWA, whether it was Crockett Promotions, the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
Ted Turner.
That kind of muddies to me.
To me, that limo ride with Tony Schiavone was almost as good as the one with Cody.
Oh, sure. I feel like he's trying to pop us with that one. I agree, and then I'm like, wait a minute.
Well, speaking of memorable list, I got my boy Mike Flynn here. He always has a good list. Mike Flynn's got Terry Funk versus Ric Flair, I Quit match. Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat, Wrestle War 89. Flair versus Barry Windham, Crockett Cup 87, I believe that was. Steamboat versus Flair, Clash of the Champions. That is the Raging Cajun event in New Orleans. And Flair versus Sting, and that's the first Clash of Champions. So, solid list.
That's a good list. No, it's a very good list by Mike Flynn.
Yeah. Kid fucking brings it.
Solid list.
Kid fucking brings it every time. Joe, who you got left here?
I was going to say, speaking of bringing it every time, we didn't forget him this week. The man with the plan. He's causing harm on the farm. That's Randy Osga. And he's got Flair.
No fucking limits, baby. Randy, what's up?
He's got Flair versus Funk, I Quit match. Flair versus Steamboat, Chi-Town. He's got Tully versus Magnum, I Quit match. He's got Piper versus Valentine, Dog Collar match. And he's got Sting versus Vader, Starrcade 92.
Wow.
I'm
glad they took the plow off him long enough. He came up with a good list.
Yes. They took the plow off of Valentine and Piper too, buddy. Hey, you know what's funny? What you're seeing on this list is Flair and Steamboat are making a lot of lists, but the matches are getting divided up. Whereas
They do. They had so many memorable matches, unfortunately, that they're taken away from each other.
right. So like that in this next list, like I got from Scott, we'll see a similar thing here. Again, Flair versus Funk, I Quit match. Magnum versus Tully, I Quit match. Flair versus Steamboat, Wrestle War 89. Scott also has the first ever War Games, and Flair versus Sting from the Clash 88. So we've seen about 3 different Flair Steamboat matches on these lists, but we've also seen a Flair Funk I Quit match pretty much on everybody's list, and it's the same match.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I was disappointed when I saw that Scott had War Games on his list that I didn't include it. Because I've been listening to the Laps fan retrospective on War Games and going back and watching a few of those events. And that's got to be one of the premier NWA events of the time. One of their biggest gimmick events, I would believe.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, it's funny. I'm just going to go right to my next list here, and then AJ will get you a list in here. But I got Zach. And again, this one, I guess, is a little more of the popular one. Flair Steamboat 89 Wrestle War. I feel like that's popping up a little more. Flair versus Funk, I Quit match. Flair and Sting versus Muta and Funk in the Thunderdome cage.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. That's where Muta put out the fire with the mist, man.
He's a Japanese hero.
Right, damn right he is.
Zach doesn't do many stupid things, but welcome, Zach, to the Stupid Club.
That's also where I overheard it just recently, where Muta was climbing near the electrical fence, and Jim Ross said, "Better be careful. He's about to be fried wonton up there." Which is totally not something you could say now, but back then you could.
Be careful mentioning that. You're going to get Jim Ross canceled.
Yeah. We got the Crockett Cup 87 finals, the Road Warriors versus the Midnight Express. Hey, AJ, has he redeemed himself yet? We got Flair versus Nikita, Starrcade 86. And we also have, I think I just gave you all of them, yeah. I forgot, I also have a list from Tim Hartford here, too.
Oh, put it out there.
Yeah, I actually had to knock one of them out. He had the alley fight between Patterson and Slaughter from 1981. That was under WWF, unfortunately, Tim. So
yeah, that's WWE and WWF.
Yes, but we do have
WWF if you want to get technical.
He might be. Yeah, well, we got Flair versus Wyndham, Crockett Cup 87, Rock and Roll Express versus the Andersons, Iron and Ole 86. I believe that's Starrcade. Dusty versus Flair 86. That could be Starrcade or the Bash. And we got Piper versus Valentine in a dog collar match. That is Starrcade. So Piper Valentine dog collar match makes a few lists here too.
And do you think that's only because they had the recent AEW dog collar match and kind of brought that up in people's minds?
It definitely was a refresher for it at seeing the dog collar, but that is one of those matches. I'm a firm believer it's the best match on the original Starrcade. So
yeah.
For me, it's always in my mind.
It's definitely better than that Flair race match bullshit. Gene Kaninsky tripping all over the place like a drunk.
I didn't say Gene Kaninsky made the match, but you got Flair, you got Race. in the equivalent of their WrestleMania, the biggest collision of the time, to me, it's just a work of art.
You know what?
I think on an election day, we're better off not talking about race.
As much as I love Flair versus Race, not at Starrcade 83. They fucked it up. Hard to believe two great pros did it. In fact, I won't blame them. I'll blame it on that drunk-ass referee, Gene Kaninsky, who tripped over the place the whole time.
So, this one, my first one's going to blur the timeline a little bit. This might be WCW. I'm going with Thesz versus Kaninsky. No, that's not true.
It was Thesz versus Fritz that you wanted on your list.
Exactly. My bad. No, my first one on the list actually was the dog collar match. I am a big fan of Greg Valentine and Rowdy Piper. They absolutely tore it up at the first Starrcade. That match is always going to live in the minds of people. Another great one, actually, if you go back and you love pure wrestling, Dory Funk versus Jack Briscoe for Dory Funk's first championship. Absolutely incredible match.
I just fell asleep. Hold on.
Would that have been championship wrestling from Florida?
No, that was technically, because it's an NWA world title match, is technically still under the NWA banner. You got to remember all of those regional matches back then when going for the NWA title was sanctioned by the NWA.
Okay.
So that's definitely an NWA match.
True.
Another great one for me, I'm definitely, I'm a huge Terry Funk fan, and his I Quit match with Ric Flair, obviously one of the great matches of all time. Flair and Steamboat, Chi-Town, I'm a fan of the Chicago match. And then my last one is actually the I Quit match between Tully and Magnum TA.
There you go. A hell of a list. I'm surprised you went with Chicago, being that's where Steamboat actually won the belt, but it is a good one.
I think it was actually Steamboat winning the belt.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the other matches were great too, but as much as I'm a Flair fan, I think that the best match that they had was actually Steamboat going over.
And it was the defining moment of his career other than WrestleMania 3. So it was kind of cool to see for Ricky. All right. My list, I'm going to include Chi-Town Rumble as well. Flair Steamboat, definitely on my list. Terry Funk and Ric Flair I Quit match. Guys, in the earlier episodes of the podcast on Dave Remembers, a segment we forgot about, I talked about this match. Flair Funk I Quit match. Come on. Of course I'm going to put this on my list. Also, a little fun one here for you. I think AJ and me actually talked about this, but he didn't put it on his list, so I'm going to put it on my list. Best of 7 with Magnum TA and Nikita Koloff. I'll take match number 7, but that whole series was just awesome.
And to be honest with you, Dave, that's a great pick. The only reason I ended up keeping it off was because I didn't want to have to choose between the 7 matches.
Yeah. That's fair. I went with number 7. I'm going to also include another I Quit match in there, Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA. And also just to jack off somebody else's picks, Scott, the first War Games. You fucking got it, baby. I'm putting it in there, too.
I thought you were stealing Dory Funk.
I'm not stealing that snooze fest.
All right, Dave, now that we got the first round on, who did you see that showed up on the most list? I mean, the Flair Funk I Quit's got to be on there.
It's got to be on there.
Well, the problem with Flair Steamboat is so many of the matches were picked, but it wasn't necessarily the same one.
True. I'm gonna throw Flair Steamboat Wrestle War 89 in there. I feel like that one went in there a little more. I'm gonna make that decision over the dog collar match. Just because we saw Flair Steamboat, but you got to include Tully and Magnum's I Quit match because that was in there plenty of times as well. So I think that's the top 3 we're looking at here. I'm going to say Flair Steamboat Wrestle War 89 and both I Quit matches. And by the way, just shows you too, when an I Quit match is done properly, it's one of the best matches you can do.
Absolutely.
So, AJ, how about this? Who would you boot off this list out of those 3?
Jesus. Christ. I don't want to have to
pick. Playing heel. Let's be the heel, bud.
I'm getting rid of the I Quit match.
Which one?
Both of them.
Yeah, both. No, Tully and Magnum.
Okay.
Wow, why did you pick that over the Flair Funk one?
Because I think Flair and Funk, the reason why it's on so many lists is because it's I've said this a million times, it's the originator of hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
Those two actually have meant so much to what wrestling has become today. And I think that match belongs on the list. Whereas as much as I love Magnum and Tully, and they did make my list, I think that match just doesn't mean as much today as it did then.
I'll tell you what, as much as I could tell he was kind of pulling that one out there a little bit, I'm going to agree with him. I would take that one off the list too. I would have it down to that great wrestling classic of Steamboat Flair versus the intensity of Flair and Funk. But at the end of the day, because Flair and Steamboat was watered down a little bit on this list, I don't think anything matches the intensity anyway of Flair and Funk. This is Funk at its absolute best in my mind, and Flair is right there too. Absolutely the best match of all time. It takes home the gold. Flair Steamboat Wrestle War 89 is the silver, and Tully and Magnum is the bronze. And that's how I'm laying it down.
All right, I've got to wrap up. The warden's calling me from my cell.
All right.
All right, folks, when you hear the music, you know what it means. Thank you for joining us on another week of the 531, and we will talk to you again next week.
Later.